It is so frustrating and painful when you set intentions that you cannot follow through on. If you're the kind of person that struggles with discipline or just has a hard time establishing new habits for yourself, you know the cycle of trying really hard for a couple of days, giving up, and then leaving it alone for a while and just watching time go by. And if you ever try to get inspired by ideas of discipline that you see from other people, something that you'll see a lot and something that you might naturally come to on your own is this idea that you should never make an excuse for yourself. This is something that just seems like it's obviously part of the discipline mindset, that you have to embrace the hard thing, that you can't give yourself any excuses, and that you punish yourself for failing to encourage yourself to succeed. This video is going to be me telling you to let yourself off the hook and explain the psychology of why you should let yourself off the hook and what you should be doing instead. If you don't know who I am, I'm Justin, and I do discipline and mental health coaching for a living, so I'm really familiar with the kind of sabotaging points that people come in with when they pick up ideas from pop psychology, and this is one of them. And it's one of them because in the center of this message of don't give yourself any excuses is a sabotaging belief that you're reinforcing. But I'm going to start with why we even get here, because it doesn't immediately make sense that you would somehow get more discipline by letting yourself off the hook when you fail to exercise discipline. And this idea that making excuses leads to problems is something that's supported in psychology, but just not in the way that people think it is. What is being described as closest to a self-licensing effect, and it's probably something that you've heard of through like the Diet Coke example. So one of the most popular examples of this being pointed out is when people justify eating something that's really unhealthy because they choose a Diet Coke over a regular Coke. That is the self-licensing effect. And what it is when we use a positive action or hold up a positive idea of ourselves to justify doing something that's kind of bad or self-indulgent. So while this idea of excusing yourself leading to bad consequences is supported, it's supported in literally the opposite direction. Because while that self-licensing effect is about using positive things to justify doing bad things, what you're doing when you tell yourself that you had no excuse to fail is embracing your negative actions to try and encourage you towards positive ones. And the reason that doesn't work is because of the secret message that is embedded in it. And that secret message is actually really obvious once you point it out, which is that if you had no excuse to fail, why the fuck would you expect anything to be different next time? When you tell yourself, I have no excuse, I gotta do it, what you're saying is the fact that I failed today is exactly what I should expect tomorrow. And this is part of a kind of motivation that we call self-efficacy. And that looks at how our belief in our ability to do something really determines if we have the motivation to go ahead and do it. There is a massive difference between using a good thing to justify a bad thing and creating distance between yourself and the negative thing so you don't assume that that's your future forever. In other words, it's bad to say, I did it yesterday so I don't have to do it today, but it's good to say, well, I didn't get good sleep yesterday, so it makes sense that I wasn't able to do it today. So rather than making no excuses, we are making a very clear excuse of, I didn't get enough sleep. Because when you do this, you are making it so that your identity and your capabilities as a human being isn't absorbing the entire brunt of this failure. Because that is not something that motivates you to try again tomorrow. And maybe more importantly than that, it stops you from calling out the action. And I'm going to give you a really clear example from a past client of mine to explain how. So we're going to call this past client John. It's obviously not their real name, but that's their name for this video. And John had a really clear intention where he wanted to get home every day after work and work on his book for 90 minutes. He had 90 minutes every evening. He knew what he was going to do. The goal felt really simple and it felt like there were no excuses not to do it. The problem is that writing a book for 90 minutes is a fucking impossible goal because it's actually really complex. Like, where do you start? Where do you create the structure? What research is needed in it? Right? Like just write a book is very hard to do as just an action on itself. It's so vague and so large. But because the intention was so strong and the will and the desire to do it was so strong, and John kept telling himself that he had no excuses not to do it, there was never any critical evaluation of how vague that goal was. So John gets home in the evenings, he stares at a blank page, he has no idea what to do about it, he procrastinates, he blames himself, and then he ends up in this cycle of avoidance. John had a really clear excuse for why it was so hard to actually stick to the task of writing his book, which is that it's a very complex thing and he had no guidelines on how to do it. But he blamed himself and his character and his intention. John started by saying, I have no excuses, I failed today, tomorrow I gotta sit down and just do it, I'm not gonna let myself off the hook. But what ended up actually working for him was saying, it makes sense that I wasn't able to do it because it was a really hard goal. Let me blame my goal and make an excuse for myself and find a way to work on it tomorrow that's easier. We inherently assumed that the goal was working against him and that his ability to work on the book was fine. We got John to excuse himself and blame his strategy. And whether people in the self-discipline sphere even realize it, they're doing this all the fucking time. If you're the kind of person where you've built a career off of having a disciplined identity, that identity is staying intact no matter how many times you fail at something. They're not taking responsibility for who they are. They're taking responsibility for things in the environment that are working against them. So when John gave himself an excuse and looked for something to blame, he was able to call out the problem, which is that his goal was not specific enough. And that is why you should give yourself excuses. Now, obviously, the other component here is what is difficult about it? How do you adjust the goal? And everything else that makes psychology so hard to make public content on. But I cannot think of a single example where telling yourself that you had no excuse and beating yourself up over failures actually leads to positive results. So my suggestion is really simple: never do it. What I would also like you to do is look at this other video I made where I talk about one of the biggest ideas in discipline, which is that discipline is better than motivation, and why that is way too simple. And of course, when you're living by ideas that are too simple or that are wrong, you are setting yourself up for sabotage. So that's why I like focusing on principles over specific systems or strategies. And if that's the kind of thing you're into, subscribe and like and do all the other things that help this channel. That's everything I have to say about it. So thanks for watching.